Great. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I mean, shout if you can't hear me all right, but I assume it's going all right. Yeah, so I'm John Chandler. I'm coming from UCL, and I just wanted to talk very briefly just about what we've been doing at UCL, and also in partnership with sort of colleagues at Lincoln, and also Tallis Education as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go, to think about how we use text-based resources in large first-year models, both through the pandemic, obviously, but it's something which we're continuing thinking about as we move into sort of hybrid and face-to-face teaching as well. It's really been a really interesting sort of conference for me so far. Nice to hear everyone sort of dealing with the same challenges, I think, that I am. And definitely I was feeling you, Francois, Frederick, sorry, thinking about the sort of the people who do most of the large class teaching don't really have time to publish about it or think about it. It's definitely something which I feel you on that one, and it's something we're trying to rectify. So here's just a very brief overview of the paper that I wanted to talk about today. So the main thing we're thinking about is the impact of the shift to digital reading that we've experienced over the last decade, but has particularly been accelerated by the pandemic, and that the impact of that on student learning and engagement, which I think we found hasn't really had a great deal of research done to it. The shift to digital reading is, and by that I mean reading that is electronic, but also increasingly online as well. So students are connected to the internet while they're doing the reading. It's something which we've just kind of all accepted as happened, but no one's really thought about what that actually means. It's been part of a larger research project we're doing on what we're calling active online reading, and there's more information on our project website at the bottom to really think about how students are actually engaging with texts, both in its sort of a physical sense. I mean, some of our findings are quite shocking, but not necessarily surprising, in the sense most of students do their reading on their phones. That most of the students do a lot less reading than we think they do. Most of our students do their reading in a way in which they're not engaging in, I would say, in a particularly active or deep way, because they're being connected to the internet. They have constant other notifications and things going on as well, and there's an awful lot of distractions. And this is not something that's new, I don't think, but it's definitely something that is becoming increasingly prevalent, increasingly important, as I think now my students, 99% of them do all their reading online, all their reading on devices rather than actually in a physical library. And in a discipline like history, which is where we are, that's obviously where reading is the core part of what we now would call the asynchronous preparation that students are doing. The kind of the prep work is really focused on reading, and actually this is a big shift which we haven't really dealt with. So what I was going to talk about today is our use of a social annotation tool Tallis, a company we've been working with, although there are other tools available which I can talk about, in two of our large first year courses, which we saw was kind of contributed to an increase in student engagement, but obviously it had to be sort of thought about how we use this tool. And the concept we're playing with, which I'd very much want to get your feedback on, which we're calling active online reading, which is basically a process in which we're combining structured individual commenting activities with responding to student annotations. So there's the link, which I can pop into the chat later. So I just wanted to quickly talk about two case studies that we've done, one at Lincoln and one at UCL, over the last academic year during the middle of the pandemic, and how we use this social annotation software to try and encourage students to engage more with their reading, despite being in these large classes, being some of them online as well. At Lincoln, we piloted it in a module called The Medieval World, which was a core first-year undergraduate module taught over 12 weeks, 161 students last year, and taught asynchronously online, as most courses were. There was also sort of a periodic face-to-face socially distanced seminar, and the other seminars were taught using this as an asynchronous form, using this software. So students were provided with a weekly worksheet and guided questions, which was uploaded through Tallis Elevate, and they had to annotate and discuss, and they were given kind of prompts of questions to answer, parts of the document to highlight and comment on, and we used that as a form for them to discuss the material. Students would kind of comment and answer and comment on and reply to each other, and the teacher can also kind of well, it's not an official term, but what we call a kind of a super comment, where they can come in and it kind of has a sort of a teacher hat to show the teacher has been commenting as well. And so we've been using that, that's been used at Lincoln as a way of encouraging student engagement. I'm very happy to talk in more detail about what we actually did or what was actually done in the Q&A. But our responses to student surveys showed that this really kind of improved their understanding of the subject. They're very positive about it. We certainly as instructors felt this was a really good way of engaging with students kind of asynchronously. And this is something which has come out through our wider research, actually, is that students really enjoy being able to see their peers' annotations. They commented things like it gave them more confidence, they knew what they were doing, they kind of felt like they understood the material more. It really helped them feel like they were analysing the content, which is an issue we often have in history of students not really understanding how to, or not even realising that they are analysing the content. But something which came up a lot is that they expressed anxiety about commenting themselves. And this is something we found with sort of any kind of annotation activity, is students really value seeing other people's annotations, but aren't necessarily too happy about doing it themselves. The second case study, which was a course that I taught at UCL called Approaching History, and this is taught over the 20 weeks. Last year we had 241 students, which for history is very big. I mean, I hear about 2,500 students, and I don't know how you do it, but for history in the UK, that is a very large course. And it's taught as a 1 hour asynchronous last year and a 1 hour live Zoom lecture as well. And in contrast to my colleagues at Lincoln, I actually use this as a live activity. So rather than being a kind of asynchronous activity, I use this as a tool within my sort of lectures itself. And within the lectures, we basically kind of followed up on, I tried to make it more of a discussion within of the content that they were dealing with, and really focused on activities around answering questions and doing analysis of sample essays or exam scripts, and use students to kind of use this software to encourage students to engage with each other in the script within this live Zoom environment. It was something which I was one who tried breakout rooms, and they did not go well. So this was a different response. Again, the students felt that the activities were beneficial and useful at gaining new skills of analysing academic papers, appreciated the ability to bounce ideas off each other, sort of virtually, as you like. But again, we had sort of students commenting about sort of the anxiety of doing it. And I think there's sort of the issues about that we have in any class of some students feeling like it's dominated by some students. That kind of is, even in these online environments, is the same thing, that certain students dominate, and it's a feeling that those are the students who are benefiting most, and it doesn't benefit the whole student body. As you can see in the sort of the comments on the right, you can enable anonymous commenting, which kind of helps, I think helps overcome that barrier, but it's still something that students are concerned about, sort of that sort of visibility. And so those are the two case studies I went over very quickly that you can read more in our paper. We're going into more detail about it. As I said, there's the project website where we've got a lot more information about this kind of concept of active online reading, which I've really just touched the surface on. But I think in sum, it's thinking about how we encourage students to engage a bit more deeply with these readings, with these online readings, even though, if anything, the shift to digital online reading is pushing them to engage less with them, and trying to find ways to use technology to encourage them to think more deeply and critically about their reading. Student feedbacks are generally quite positive about the process, and we've done sort of over the last academic year a bigger survey of students in more kind of institutions and subject areas about this kind of process of not just using Talis Elevate, but other software like Perusal or Hypothesis, which is the same kind of thing, and how they've engaged with it. Generally the common responses are that they think it's a good way of encouraging independent learning, confidence, critical thinking, but this sort of notion of a minority of students about the anxiety of doing so is there underneath it as well, that we have to think about. For me, and in the context of thinking about large classes and the context of having used it this academic year as well, when we've been in a hybrid form, is that I think it helps reduce this problem of limited time for interaction within large classes, and that's both interaction between students, but interaction also between the student and the teacher. So it's something this year I've been kind of following from what I did last year during the pandemic when it was entirely online. This year I've followed the same thing where we've been doing kind of annotations within the physical lecture theatre, and the students all have their laptops, so I've got to ask them to comment on it in real time, and I'll be there, and it's something where you can kind of ask students to discuss in their pairs, but also then comment on anonymously on the screen, which I can then instantly feed back onto, which is a way for kind of students to communicate with each other, even if they're in this group 250, 300, but also for me to kind of pick up on ideas, which it's working well, I think, and it's a way of also our lectures have been hybrid, as I say, so we usually had about 150 in a lecture theatre and 150 at home or remotely, and it's been a way of sort of breaking down that divide a little bit, which I think has worked quite well. And yeah, sort of, I think the key takeaway is students kind of picking up on this approach is something that's just helping them think about these higher order skills and this analysis of skills particularly. So yeah, that's me. I'll leave it there. I'm happy to talk more in the Q&A, and I will pop the link in the chat as well.